Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's panel. My name is William Russell, and I am the 692nd Lord Mayor of London and an ambassador for the UK's financial and professional services. As many of you will know, my role entails global travelling and engaging with government and industry to build strong partnerships between the UK and overseas. Of course, my international engagement has taken place virtually throughout much of this year. But I've been encouraged by the amount of activity that's been taking place within the sector, both domestically and internationally. Earlier this year, the City Corporation were proud to support a virtual UK FinTech Week, which showcased the excellence of UK innovation to a global audience. And today, I'm very pleased to be invited to play a role in the Singapore FinTech Festival. I would like to thank the Department for International Trade this opportunity to work with them. And of course, to Her Majesty's High Commissioner, Cara Owen, and Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner, Natalie Black, for their work to support UK-Singapore links. This FinTech Festival is one of the largest FinTech events globally, and it's a privilege to be invited to host this panel, Rising to the Challenge, Financial Services Innovation Amidst a Global Pandemic, and to be discussing UK and Singapore innovation, particularly alongside some real experts. Everyone watching will understand the important role that innovation has played in financial services over the last decade. We have seen huge progress in technology that supports consumers, businesses, as well as underpinning and revolutionizing the sector. It is now more than ever that FinTech will have a central role. This has been a very challenging year for many people globally. And indeed, during the pandemic, FinTech has been one sector that has flourished and proved of immense value in keeping the financial systems functioning correctly. But I'm also proud that in the UK, we have seen innovative firms pivot and take the lead in supporting society. This is evidenced through the continued investment that we are seeing channeled into UK FinTech. Even through the pandemic, UK FinTech such as Revolut, Fly Advantage, and Onfido have closed deals which have included international investors. I've always said that the UK is a global hub because of its proximity to policymakers, regulators, and a world-class financial and professional services sector. I'm delighted that this continues, and I'm pleased to have the chance to discuss with our panelists how we are still playing a leading role, whether it be our very own Bank of England or our regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority. Of course, we are delighted to be discussing this alongside the Monetary Authority of Singapore. And there are strong links between Singapore and the UK and FinTech. Singapore is also a leading FinTech hub. The Monetary Authority has really sowed the seeds for FinTech success. And I look forward to hearing from them. As ever, we look forward to ever stronger engagement with our friends in Singapore, which we will mutually support FinTech trade and investment, as well as support our firms to power up and take a leading role globally. So without further ado, let's kick off the conversation. Now, I would like to introduce our world-class panel who join me today. Sopnendu Mohanty, Chief FinTech Officer at the Monetary Authority of Singapore. Louise Eggett, who is Head of Bank of England's FinTech Hub. And Nick Cook, Director of Innovation at the FCA. Now, I'm going to dive straight into our conversation. Sopnendu, could you tell us about the wider interest MAS has in FinTech and the role you are playing in the sector?
Lord Mayor, first, thanks for having me in this forum, and more importantly, the true partnership between Singapore and UK in this space has been now almost 5 years. I remember in 2015 when we started our first, I think you are the first country where we had this collaboration of a joint MOU with UK, because by 2015, UK has in a way established itself as a leading FinTech hub. And we wanted to partner with somebody who has seen this for from 2010 to 2015, because that's the genesis of FinTech, the post-global financial crisis. Now, in Asia, as Lord Mayor, you will know, Asia has, in a very unique way, has shifted its own economic construct to a digital ecosystem. Asia's fast growing market in terms of mobile usage, the internet penetration, and Asia saw this opportunity to actually leapfrog some of its constraint because they thought, I mean, they did see the opportunity where they can use the internet and the mobile as a way to leapfrog many of the constraints they have in the market. Now, that's the on the broader digital economy shift. What needs to follow that is also a digital finance. You can't have a leapfrogging of people through the mobile phone for other services while finance stays behind. And historically, banks have been not that, I would say, that fast in catching up on the technology side, and they have been quite constrained. In fact, I used to make a fun that if one sector has the most concentrated legacy technology, it are the banks. So banks had a lot of catch up to do. So in Singapore, when we think about our future hub, we did see an opportunity and also almost an existential crisis because if you are not there in the technology architected financial sector, your relevance becomes progressively less important. So we thought this is not a necessity, but also as an opportunity to get into this process of how do we adopt the best of technology and start thinking about redesigning our financial sector. And just to add to this point, because by 2015, most of the fintech narrative was in two space. Either they're talking about payments or they're talking about platform lending. And this is where I think Singapore was able to pick some of the opportunity as a hub. We expanded the definition of fintech. So we told to ourselves, let's apply the same principles and logic of fintech to every possible financial sector asset class, be it insurance, be it wealth management, be it trade finance, be it corporate infrastructure. Let's try to expand the definition. And that's the reason why in Singapore, after 5 years, there's a unique difference between other hub. Largely, these are B2B fintech. There's a fintech which are helping banks to digitize faster. So the market conditions, the market opportunity did create a different kind of fintech opportunity for Singapore. And we kind of use this as a way to define ourselves as one of the hubs globally well known for fintech.
Thanks, Sopnendu. That's absolutely fascinating. And you're right, fintech is so many different asset classes or different sectors within financial services. Now, Louise, the Bank of England and the FCA have distinct roles and interests when it comes to UK fintech. Can you tell us more about how you approach this?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Lord Mayor, and it's a privilege to be on this panel and to be part of Singapore Fintech Festival. So thank you for the opportunity. So here at the Bank of England, our mission is to promote promote monetary and financial stability for the good of the people of the United Kingdom, and we very much see fintech as a way to work towards that mission. We embrace fintech to deliver our mission, and really we see it. It's important for us to see how fintech and innovation are shaping the financial system. I very much recognise what Sopnendu was saying around the digital economy and financial services not being able to be left behind. And that interaction is really important for us. It's really seeing a shift in the UK economy, becoming more and more digital, more and more data-driven. And how financial services respond to that is crucial for the Bank of England, both in understanding our economy and in ensuring that our financial system is stable. So that's really an important lens through which we look at fintech. We're not a supervisor in the same way as our colleagues at the FCA for the most part, but we are really interested to see what innovation can do for our economy and our system. I think within that, we have a few priorities. So first is around the safe deployment of new technologies and supporting that safe deployment. So it's really important for us that our regulated financial institutions can make the most of the benefits that comes from things like AI and cloud, new business models, and the wave of innovation we're seeing. And to make the most of those opportunities while at the same time understanding and managing the risks. A second priority is around payments, really recognising that payments in a digital age look quite different to how they've looked in the past. There's been an awful lot of innovation here, from the very smallest startups to really large cross-border enterprises and consortiums. And I think we're going to see some radical changes in payments over the coming years. And as a central bank at the heart of that infrastructure and as a payment systems regulator, we are really fascinated by the opportunities there and really keen to ensure that that's done in a safe way that preserves the stability in our system. And then the last theme which we look at is, coming back to that point I mentioned earlier, understanding the interaction between the digital economy and financial services and how financial services are shifting to serve that. I think in a report we did last year, we looked at data. I think more data has been created in the last decade than in the whole of human history, and understanding how the economy responds to that and how financial services can use that to support the delivery of crucial services to the economy is at the heart of how we're thinking about fintech and innovation. I hope that's useful to set the scene for our interest as a central bank.
Thank you very much. And as they say, data is the new oil. And I praise you at the Bank of England and Nick when it comes to regulation. Without the regulators, we would not be where we are in the UK around fintech. So Nick, I would love you to elaborate a bit more on the FCA's interest in an approach to fintech. And I congratulate you already on your approach, but interested to hear where we are now.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Very kind of you, both for the introduction and the compliment. Again, thanks for including me in part of this panel. It's nice to see friends and colleagues, and I look forward to the time that we can do this face-to-face, but in the interim, this is a nice alternative. Everything we do at the FCA, including our work on innovation and fintech, much like our colleagues at MAS and at the Bank of England, is obviously guided by our statutory objectives. I mean, the fundamental one really for us that we hang a lot of our innovation and fintech work around is our a competition objective, which revolves around promoting effective competition in the interests of consumers. We have a really strong belief in the value of innovation and competition to deliver positive outcomes in markets. And we see that fintech can and does play a really crucial role in offering new products and services, additional choice to consumers, both those currently served by financial services, but also importantly those that have been somewhat more excluded in traditional financial markets. We believe and recognise that digitally native solutions offered by many fintechs have real potential to meet consumer needs, both appropriately and at a desirable cost. And by desirable, clearly in some markets, I mean cheaper cost. But we also recognise that a potent and effective financial market and industry needs diverse players. So it doesn't just need a plethora of new startups, it also needs larger incumbent institutions, and we attempt to, where we can, stimulate and foster innovation within those institutions as well. Fintechs themselves, I mean, it's a broad church, but across the sector, we see fintechs that do directly compete with incumbents. We see others that operate in a more B2B manner in the way that Sopnendu articulated. But we also see the impact that fintech has on influencing the approaches of incumbents and encouraging incumbents to think about how they digitize and offer new service and new value to consumers. As a regulator, we have to strike a really fine balance between supporting innovation to deliver benefit and value to consumers, but whilst also properly understanding and managing the risks that these new innovations can pose. And we have a range of different approaches and services that we offer both into the market to try and achieve that twin aim, really, of balancing opportunity and risk. So things like our sandbox services, our hackathon program or tech sprints. All of these are crucial in us developing and maintaining our learning and making sure that our regulatory response to the innovation is appropriate.
Thank you very much, Nick. So just to have, what I was going to do now is a question for everyone. And how has innovation in financial services fared throughout 2020? And it's been a tough year, and I'm keen to hear what role fintech has played during the pandemic. So I'm going to get back to you, Nick, and can you provide an overview of the initiatives launched during the pandemic? What sort of behind-the-scenes insights can you show into how and why you launched some of these initiatives.
Sure. So, I mean, I think the experience of fintech and the financial markets generally has clearly been quite mixed during the pandemic. We've seen some institutions reduce significantly their innovation budget as they've focused on shoring up core operations and frankly, coping and responding to the pressures and the challenges of the pandemic. But we've also seen a broad group of institutions who have, for whom the pandemic has deepened their recognition and understanding of the need to digitize. And it has driven more passion, more appetite, and more demand for digital-first solutions within institutions. Clearly, remote working, the more virtual life that many of us are living is part of that. The reduced use of cash in society, of course, has accentuated that as well. But what that's also done is reveal, again, quite starkly, groups of consumers that are underserved in a digital world. And clearly that creates both demand and opportunity for fintechs and other institutions. If you include it within the fintech sector, we've also seen a lot of uptick in appetite around regtech and supervisory technologies. As firms and indeed regulators have had to adapt to a new, more digital, more remote world. But notwithstanding all that, we've seen some negative effects as well. You see new scams coming into the market, people taking advantage of this pandemic, highly regrettably. But nonetheless, that again poses threats to both markets and regulators, and technology and new uses of data analytics are one of the ways in which we're seeing firms and regulators respond. Probably the main thing that we've done beyond a lot of sort of policy change, many regulators have had to implement rapid policy change to try and protect consumers through this really difficult phase, and also to ensure that money continues to move around the economy and is available for small businesses and the like. So there's been a lot of work that the FCA and others and the Bank of England have done to try and ensure the policy environment protects and enables some resiliency and stability through the pandemic. But probably the main new thing that we've launched in the innovation space has been our digital sandbox, which we launched in collaboration with your City of London Corporation. We were intending to build this prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic, it's fair to say, has accelerated our plans to implement this sandbox. And this is a new offering. Has some parallels with MAS's APIX offering that it offers to fintechs and other institutions, but it's effectively a digital and virtual testing environment to try and facilitate rapid prototyping and development of technology solutions to meet consumer and regulatory needs. We have focused that sandbox in its first phase on 3 COVID areas that we think are particularly relevant. The first being enabling the provision of significant amounts of SME financing, so addressing some of the SME funding gaps that we see in the market. The second is to tackle some of these new scams and frauds and issues and looking at how technology can be applied to that issue. And then the third is looking at new solutions that help to identify and address consumer vulnerability. So that launch of that new sandbox, which is in its pilot phase, is probably the most profound sort of innovation service that we've tried to offer. At the same time that we've seen a pretty significant uptick generally in demand for our other innovation services, things like our advice unit. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Nick. Very interesting. And it's fascinating. I did a North American virtual trip with a whole lot of VCs. And as you know, a lot of the North American VCs are looking at investing in fintech in the UK. And they talked about how a number of their investments have been made virtually. They obviously hadn't met the people in person, and that's the first time that's happened. So, in a way, the COVID has made things more efficient in many ways. Now, Sopnendu, how about from MAS's perspective? Have there been any key initiatives that you could share from 2020 as well?
So if you look at the data today in the 2020, it gives a very interesting insight on how fintech has changed dramatically during the COVID period. I'll give you 2 numbers. In 2019, the total investment to Singapore on fintech was close to $1.2 billion. Quite a reasonably good money compared to previous year. So in this year in February, I was looking at the number. The number was around 20-30 million dollar. I thought this year is gone. I don't expect investor to pump in with new money in the sector. The number year to date today is 1.3 billion dollar. It's going to exceed last year's investment number, at least by 20-30%. And the reason I think I started looking at the data inside and try to understand what happened. There's a significant shift the way fintech is viewed during the crisis. If I look at the number, 50% of the investment came for fintechs who are in the business of helping small businesses to digitize and who are in the business of helping banks to digitize faster. So the investors took a massive bet on companies who are helping small businesses, which was not a trend before 2020. Before 2020 is all about individual customers. It all is all about automating processes, making e-payments available. These are all growing trend. We saw in 2020 the e-payments went like 10 times, 20 times in many other sector. But this massive shift on the investors' view on fintech clearly showed that the fintech has finally arrived, because when you start helping the small businesses, you have been now part of the mainstream sector, because that's the point. 80% of global GDP, I mean, in many cases 80% of employment comes from small businesses, and if fintechs are going to play a key role in that digital transformation, to me that's the most dramatic and transformative shift fintech had during 2020, and that's perhaps quite stand out against anything we have done till now. And to end this 2020 lens, there's also a massive shift on fintech going into sustainability, because one of the challenges in the green finance is a lack of data, lack of a good algorithm to process the data, and also lack of technology which allows distributed computing. So fintechs are already doing well in those three: AI, data, blockchain. So they could take that technology and start shifting themselves to the green fintech quite rapidly. To me, that's the second big shift happened in 2020 as against 2019.
Thank you very much, Sopnendu. I mean, you're absolutely right about the green bit, and we held the Green Horizon Summit here at the Mansion House 2 weeks ago, and the interest was huge. COP26 coming up in November 21. The pandemic has, if anything, focused the world's eyes on the green agenda. Now, a question to all of you as regulators, and what do you see the biggest challenges in moving your innovation agenda forward? Louise, maybe you could to answer that area, and which areas within fintech have become are emerging as the greatest UK strengths.
Thank you. So I think I'll start with things which are a challenge for us, and I guess it's a point that was mentioned by one of the previous speakers in response to your last question around innovation doesn't come for free in many cases. It needs firms to invest. It needs firms to invest in the technology. It needs firms to invest in the skills of their people. That's very true for us as a central bank, and for us as regulators as well, to make sure our people have the skills to interact in this more digital world. And I think that does lead to challenges around governance. So I think it's really important for us to keep a focus on understanding, making sure that the firms are understanding the benefits and that innovation can bring, but also that they have the skills to challenge the technology experts on the risks, and making sure the understanding is in line with other areas of risks in financial services that they're more used to speaking about. So something which we're working closely with our colleagues, Nick and others at the Financial Conduct Authority on, is our AI public-private forum, particularly around artificial intelligence and machine learning. That's been a big focus for us in the bank over the last few years. And we're really trying to take that discussion forward with industry experts, with practitioners, to understand what's needed for safe deployment of artificial intelligence. And I think that's an area where we're seeing UK financial services firms be very active. Something we were really interested in at the start of the pandemic is whether the other challenges in the external environment would affect investment in that sector. In fact, the survey we've done of our firms show that around half are wanting to increase their investment in these kinds of tools, particularly in a remote working environment where they've had to redeploy staff and processes and change things around pretty rapidly. So I think that brings it home to us all the more reason to understand how we get the challenges that people are facing and to make sure that the discussion is reaching the right people at the right level. I think that's a big challenge for all of us. I think the other one I would mention just quickly is that the rate of change in payments is something that many authorities around the world have been talking about for a long time. Changes in the use of cash, more and more digital payments. We're just seeing trends accelerating here, and I think it's really an important thing for us to keep an eye on. And I think an area where the UK is really at the forefront of payments innovation and open banking and some of these kinds of tools. So really just moving faster and faster, and important that we can keep track of those changes. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very good. And yes, you're right. Open banking has moved things forward. Nick, just from your perspective, which areas within fintech have become or are emerging, as you see it, as the greatest UK strengths? And then I'll go to Sopnendu and hear from a Singapore perspective.
Yeah, so I think the UK has a pretty strong position generally across most fintech verticals, and some good lived experience and some painful lessons learned, actually. And I think one of the challenges, I'll go on to strengths, but one of the challenges I think for a lot of businesses is that growth, that rapid growth phase, and knowing what are the reasonable expectations and requirements of the regulatory system when you go from being a startup to a more fundamental player. And I guess the technology world's approach of move fast and break things doesn't quite transmit into financial markets. It's not quite so tolerable when people's monies and livelihoods are at risk. But I think in terms of strengths, I think, as Louise has talked about, the sort of data economy, the UK has a lot of strength in terms of the fields of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and the exploitation and utilization of data. I think we'll see a lot more personalization of financial products in the years ahead, and I think that presents opportunities clearly to deliver more bespoke services at an appropriate price, but does also expose us to some risks of financial exclusion for certain groups for whom the price may be too high and where they may have benefited from risk pooling in the past. So I think the data economy is pretty strong in the United Kingdom, and the skills and experience across the exploitation of data are very high. An area I'd like to see as a growth area for us, and an area I think the UK will focus more on, is around digital identity, and certainly our colleagues and peers in Singapore have done a lot of work on national digital identity schemes, and that as a fundamental enabler, as a piece of the infrastructure in fintech. I think we'll see a lot of interest there. I think the UK's regtech sector is very strong, very diverse, well funded. Has benefited, frankly, from the strength of the UK's financial sector generally. There's high demand and need for regtech solutions. But I said last year, it still feels like a sleeping giant of the technology market right now, the regtech industry. I think that will be an area of real growth and strength in the years ahead. And then I think the other area where I would see the UK and others starting to do well is in the application of technology to regulators and policymakers themselves. Again, that feels like an area of really significant and potential growth, and need, frankly. We as regulators and policymakers need to modernise the way we perform our roles. And we will look to use vendor solutions where we can. So again, I think that's an area where we should start to see some real strength in the year ahead.
Nick, thank you very much. Sopnendu, from a Singapore perspective, within fintech, what's emerging as the greatest Singapore strengths?
Sure. I will extend where Nick ended, because he covered the focus Singapore has on building the national digital infrastructure, and by definition it means four things: a strong national ID system, a strong payment system, interoperable, more importantly, a strong public data system, a trusted data exchange system, kind of a open banking in many sense, and the fourth is consent system, electronic data consent system, because these are the bedrock of digital infrastructure. And that becomes not only Singapore's priority, also many Asian countries' priority, because they are shifting to digital economy and they need these digital rails to be there before they can make the final shift. But from a regulatory perspective, from a fintech perspective, there are two distinct shifts also has happened for us to focus. One of the most embarrassing moment for many central bankers and many regulators, their inability to solve the cross-border payment problem. It is still an outstanding problem where central banks don't have a way to move money from A country to B country at a speed of less than a 5 minute at a cost which people can afford to. I think that's something every central banks are struggling and they got to fix it, especially on COVID-19, where many migrant workers in many parts of the world were struggling to send money and they had to rely on other sources. Of course, we can argue saying that there is a transfer wise, there is this to solve it. But we as a central bank, we do have an obligation to fix this problem. So Singapore has taken a huge step in this space. The first country we are connecting a domestic payment network out to that country's domestic payment network is Thailand. And will the first country globally where two domestic payment systems are getting connected is with Thailand. The next country are doing it India. But that will be the new trend where the regulators will start connecting their, or central bankers will start connecting their national payment system to the other national payment system, and that truly makes the final, I'll say, the final leg of payment architecture. That's one. The second piece, Lord Mayor, which has become a very pertinent, and I'm sure in UK also you would be observing this rise of cyber issues, cyber scams, rise of, and there is a massive growth because as everybody is operating from a digital infrastructure, that has grown very very rapidly. So a lot of policies, a lot of thinking, especially market monitoring, is happening in that space, and you will see a lot of effort on cyber. And the last space is around connecting small businesses. Because one of the most backbreaking moment for many small businesses, especially small country like Singapore, which depends on globalized and trade supply chain connections, it dramatically failed because suddenly the supply chain is all over the place. So there's a massive decoupling is happening. So the supply chain has become a big crisis. So there's a lot of fintechs, regulatory thinking around how to fix it or how to make it more resilient and sustainable. Now, having said that, because that is space all of us will struggle as we come out of the crisis. So supply chain financing, how to connect the global trades, and how to help small businesses to get back to the global connections. And again, if we can stretch this, but one of the things all the regulators, especially the data regulators, will start thinking hard is their current status quo policy on data, because most of the countries data policy still is not open. I think COVID-19 has forced many countries to think about data in a very different way, keeping the privacy concerns in place, ensuring the data protection, but they must find a way to connect the data to, or allow data to be accessed by multiple, by everybody in a thoughtful way. Building trusted data corridor is the new, I would say, process, a new effort which many countries will push for, and that's what Singapore also push for: trusted data corridor.
Very good. Thank you. I mean, the trusted data corridor, I think, is going to be critical. And actually, that coordination between regulators. I remember a regulator saying to me once, a number of years ago, that it's important that the regulators talk to each other in order that we have a global standard and we're all at the top of the barrel and not at the bottom of the barrel. And on that point, regulatory coordination is so important as technology doesn't really see borders. So I'm interested to know how you coordinate with other regulators on these initiatives. So why don't we ask Nick and then first and see what Nick has to say to that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, regulators have always collaborated, and I think our approach is a mix of bilateral and multilateral, and a mix of informal and formal, as you'd expect. I think the sort of the big macro multilateral work that we have been involved in the innovation space, where we chair what's called the Global Financial Innovation Network, a group of slightly over 60 regulators, policymakers, standard setters from all continents of the world. a really diverse group, actually. It includes central banks, it includes securities regulators, it includes conduct and competition regulators. So we chair that group, and it's a group that exists to try and facilitate knowledge sharing around innovations and trends and regulatory approaches and responses. It seeks to facilitate international sandbox testing across borders. And it also has a fairly strong focus actually on the regtech and the subtech markets and how regulators themselves can become more digitally enabled. So that's the Global Financial Innovation Network. It's only been up and running for a little bit over a year. We also chair IOSCO, so the International Organization of Securities Commission has a fintech network, which we chair. A little bit over 100 regulators, securities regulators take part in that group. That group again does a mix of sort of knowledge sharing and engagement, but also produces some more detailed analysis and thought leadership for IOSCO on how fintech and regtech will impact capital markets. We've done some work under that group on stablecoins, on things like AI and model risk, on how distributed ledger technology will impact capital markets more generally. And then alongside, a real plethora, frankly, of bilateral engagement, be that helping US regulators host their first hackathons, or be that working closely with our colleagues in Singapore on how we develop our own data analytics capabilities. For the first time this year, we've embarked on a more formal technical assistance program funded by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office in the UK, where we've supported colleagues in Nigeria and worked with colleagues in Nigeria to help them build a payments sandbox and help them think through some of the challenges and opportunities of open finance and thinking through how to supervise new emerging technologies in their market. So a mix, but I guess the two big multilateral ones for us would be GFIN and the IOSCO group, through which we learn a lot, frankly.
Sounds like you're busy, Nick. Louise, what would you add to that? Central banks talking to each other?
Yes, thank you. And we have a very similar approach to our colleagues at the Financial Conduct Authority, but I was very struck by what Sopnendu was saying around cross-border payments. For us as a central bank, our journey through that area really started with our collaboration with the MAS, and we've now taken that forward through the Committee for Payments and Market Infrastructure, which is a multilateral forum chaired by one of our deputy governors. And it's really great to see the work programme that's come out of that, and the commitment of central banks and other authorities to making some real progress on that issue. I think another area where I'd want to highlight our work that we're looking forward to doing with Singapore is around the Bank for International Settlements and its innovation hubs. Singapore's centre is already up and running. We're looking forward to having the London centre in the coming months, and I think that's another great tool that central banks will be able to use to work together to understand the trends in our respective fintech centres and really see how central banks can make use of those technologies both internally and in understanding their markets and their objectives.
Thank you, Louise. And Sopnendu, interested in your thoughts. I suspect Singapore must have a huge influence with regulators within Southeast Asia and the whole of Asia.
Sure. When you're right, whatever Nick and everybody spoke about is absolutely is what is happening here. But I'll add two more topics to that. And I strongly believe, and I think we got to not take our eyes off from that, is start focusing on making the data regulations much more interoperable. I think the data regulation today is completely suboptimal in many sense. And I think while we do understand the risk of not managing data well, because ultimately all our data is going to be digital in some form, and we should have a mechanism to manage it. But central bank and regulators have to think strongly about how to make the data exchange, data interoperable across jurisdiction. And the second point, which is kind of related to data, because unless we have good data, we cannot have a great green finance strategy. So green finance will be one of that has to succeed, I think a lot of regulators have to collaborate in that space, taxonomy, classification. They still need good data. So my pitch to my fellow central bank and regulator will be do more data discussion. Better we get that and better clarity we have that, the market will innovate faster.
So time is marching on, and I just would love sort of just some final thoughts. Any key things that you would focus on or feel that we would focus on in 2020 and going forward into 2021 is what I really mean. It just, interested in any trends, any one thing that you think is going to happen in 2021, or one thing you would like to happen. And I'll start with Louise.
Thanks, Guinness. Well, I guess if you'd asked us this question near the end of 2019, the answer might have been quite different to the year which came to pass. So it feels risky saying how things will pan out. I mean, I guess for me, a continuing priority is going to be around the trends which persist or don't around digital payments. I think there's a huge number of initiatives, both from the work we're doing internally on our own systems to the wide variety of cross-border and domestic digital payments innovations. And I think for us, understanding which of those really can give the customers or businesses the protections they need while taking the agenda forward will be a crucial thing for us.
Sopnendu.
Wholesale digital currency. I think that would be a very interesting play because I believe the crisis has opened up the doors for digital currency. I think if one, of course, I agree on the whole other things we discussed. Because you asked me one thing we should think about a new trend, I think digital currency will pick up the big trend. And the crisis has opened up that opportunity to perhaps get to a stage where it becomes quite real than what we're talking now.
The price of Bitcoin, maybe we're starting to see that already. But anyway.
That is not related to this shift.
Of course not. Nick.
I think I'd probably echo Sopnendu's earlier points actually about the data economy. I think that's going to be a massive focus for regulators and policymakers in the year ahead, both in terms of how we understand the risks and benefits that data exploitation offers into financial markets and the impact that has on consumer groups, how we think about data monopolies and the impact of data access on competition, how we ourselves understand the risks and benefits of machine learning in a more finessed and advanced way, but also looking at the role that things like data standards and common definitions and taxonomies will play in either enabling, frankly, or blocking desirable scale innovation in our markets. I think so many topics in the data space, but I feel that regulators will be far more focused on it perhaps than they have in 2018, 19 and 20.
Nick, thank you. Well, it's been absolutely fascinating. Sopnendu, Louise and Nick, thank you for your time. And just, a final closing thought for me. I mean, this panel has shown how important it is and the underlying strength of collaboration between Singapore. And I very much look forward to the time when I can personally visit Singapore and Sopnendu meet you in person. But it also highlights critical collaboration around the whole world and the influence that Singapore and London will play in fintech around the world globally. So thank you very much, and it's been a real a pleasure to share this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.